Chapter 6: The Final Dispersion of the Black Jews of Africa. Early North Africa. Many scholars call the inhabitants of North Africa Berbers, but I shall not do so. I do not like this word, Berber. First of all, it is not a native word of Africa, therefore it is misleading. The Greeks and Romans called the people of North Africa Berbers, which meant barbarians. However, the people of this region have their own names. The unbiased Greek historian Herodotus, may honor be given unto him, gives the original names of the tribes of North Africa. Beginning from Egypt, extending to the Atlantic Ocean, they are as follows: Adramacadae, Giligame, Asbaite, Aushize, Kabylians, Nasamonians, Numidians, Psylli, Garamantians, Macae, Jindanes, Lolophagi, Macleans, Ausians, Troglodytes, Zavetians, Byzantians, Adarantians, and the Atlantes. Herodotus says there are 4 nations in Africa. 2 are indigenous, Ethiopians and Libyans. The Phoenicians and the Greeks are newcomers. Herodotus considered all North African tribes to be Libyans, and all the Africans below the Sahara he called Ethiopians. These are his 2 indigenous nations in Africa. The original inhabitants of North Africa were Hamites. These Hamites were black like the Egyptians, and this point has been proven by Herodotus. Because most of the history in the Western world has been distorted, it becomes necessary for me to explain to you some of these distortions. Says Heinrich Barth, a European writer, the inhabitants of Wallata are a mixed race of blacks and whites. Now the question is, whom does he include as his whites? Continues Barth, the whites are Berbers and Arabs. These Berbers and Arabs were not whites in ancient times. What is his basis for calling them whites? The obvious reason is that he wants to attribute ancient advanced civilization to the white race in order to perpetuate the philosophy of white supremacy. Many black people have straight noses and thin lips. The black people that possess these qualities are said to have a white morphology, form. Joseph Williams has this to say about the blacks of West Africa. In most mixed group of Negroes, a Songhois may be identified at first glance. His skin is black as theirs, certainly, but nothing in his mask conforms to their well-known characteristics. The nose of the Songhois is straight and long, pointed rather than flat. The lips are comparatively thin, and the mouth wide rather than prominent and broad, while the eyes are deeply set and straight in their orbits. A cursory glance shows that the profile resembles that of the European. Some European writers even penetrate into the blackest Africa, and divide the blacks according to the shape of their noses and lips. Continues Williams, the Songhais, though black-skinned and woolly-haired, their features are often of Caucasian cast. There are many colored people in the United States with straight noses and thin lips, even as black as tar, and the Europeans do not classify these colored people as belonging to the white race. After extensive research, my conclusion is this. Some European writers have classified certain tribes in Africa and Asia as belonging to the white race. They do this as long as it is psychologically advantageous, in order to inflate their ego and to give them a prominent place in Afro-Asian history. Not only were the people of Africa and Asia black in ancient times, but also the European lands of the Mediterranean. The Canaanites and Phoenicians in Africa. The language which is called Hebrew Phoenician or Canaanite was employed in the lands called Phoenicia, Palestine, and Canaan for over 1,000 years before the Armenians, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob came to Canaan. The Israelites lost their Aramaic language and adopted the Hebrew speech of the Canaanites. The Hebrew Phoenician merchants from the cities of Sidon and Tyre controlled the trade along the Mediterranean coasts for more than 1,000 years before there were any economic treaties made with the Israelites. The Hebrew-speaking Phoenicians, Canaanites, established their greatest city, Carthage, at Tunis in North Africa. All the Canaanites were black people. Before the Phoenicians established their colony, Carthage, in Africa, many Hebrew-speaking Canaanites had migrated across northern Africa. One Tosefta, quoting an older source, says that when Joshua approached Canaan, he told the inhabitants that 3 courses were open to them. They could either leave the country, or they could sue for peace, or they could declare war against him. The Girgashites, among others, preferred to withdraw into Africa. The Tosefta goes on to say that the Amorites, the Cadmoni, the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, some of whom figure among the founders of Carthage, also went to Africa. These traditions date from a period when communication between Africa and Phoenicia was continuous. The proper names of Girgash and Kenaz are often met with in Carthaginian and Phoenician inscriptions. The Talmud says that the Canaanites in Africa asked Alexander the Great to restore them their country, which had been taken from their ancestors by Joshua ben Nun. These traditions have been ratified by the Fathers of the Church. Thus St. Jerome calls witness to the Talmud to support his statement that the Girgashites established colonies in Africa, and St. Augustine designates the narratives of Africa as Canaanites. The prophet Isaiah 19:18 says that 5 cities in Africa will speak the language of Canaan. We should not forget that the Israelites have been engaged in commercial enterprises, activities, and migrations since Solomon's treaty with the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians established their metropolis, Carthage, in the 9th century BC. Eventually, they conquered the neighboring tribes from Libya to the Atlantic Ocean, disseminating their Hebrew-Phoenician language and culture in every direction. The Hebrew-Phoenician language and culture were invigorated and strengthened by the deportation and the migration of energetic black Hebrews from Palestine. Ptolemy Soter of Egypt conquered Syria and Phoenicia, deporting more than 100,000 Hebrews. The Persian king, Cambyses, had previously sanctioned the colonization of Hebrews in Egypt. During the wars of Maccabees, thousands of Hebrews became slaves and exiles. Ptolemy Lathyrus captured 10,000 slaves from the region of the Sea of Galilee. The kings of Egypt, Psamtik I and Psamtik II, used Israelite garrisons on the Egyptian borders near Libya. The wars with Rome compelled hundreds of thousands more to escape into North Africa. During the Punic Wars and after, North Africa contained a large Hebrew population. This Hebrew population made converts and intermarried with the Canaanites and the native Africans. The city and language of Hannibal. At the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists have found about 4,000 inscriptions in the ancient language of Canaan. Nahum Schlaus says these inscriptions date from the time of Nehemiah, of Simon the Just, of Hannibal, and of Hasdrubal. Says Schlaus, and the most valuable of all, we have found again the ancient language and writing of Canaan, the rich, idiomatic speech of a city which once counted 700,000 inhabitants. And we Hebrew writers, we who write and feel in our biblical tongue, have recognized at once that this recalled Phoenician language is nothing more nor less than Hebrew, a pure Hebrew dialect, nearly the same as was spoken in the country of Israel. The population of Carthage was derived from Palestine, and its civilization was Hebraic in origin. Schlaus is certain, after much research, that the language Hannibal spoke, and in which he directed his troops, was Hebrew. There is evidence that the Carthaginians possessed a high priesthood, and their ceremonies and sacrifices were similar to the rituals found in the book of Leviticus. According to some inscriptions, the Hebrew tribes of Asher and Zebulun were in Carthage from the foundation of the city. At the ruins of Carthage were excavated many inscriptions containing many Hebrew names such as Job, Joas, and Joel. The city of Tunis is said to be neither Arab nor European. Tunis is a Jewish city. Nowhere else does the Jew feel at home as he does in Tunis. Schlaus says so beautifully, and indeed, Tunis, the inheritor of the Hebrew Carthage, is the eternal city of the Jews. For, like the phoenix, the Jews have risen again and again out of the ashes of their destruction. After sacking the Carthage, the Jews were found again in Carthage under Roman domination. Under the Byzantine persecutions, they fled into the desert. And even under the persecution of the Arabs, the Jews somehow managed to survive catastrophe after catastrophe. The Moorish Empire. In less than 100 years, the Black Arabs had pushed their way completely across North Africa in the 7th century. At this time, the Arabs were black. They had not mixed much with other people. The Arabs did penetrate into the interior of the Sahara Desert, but only in small numbers, so that the territory remained basically African. Moulay Idris, the descendant of Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, brought northern Morocco under his control late in the 7th century. His son and successor was Idris II, who founded the kingdom of Fez. At this time in the land of Spain, the black Jews were persecuted, and many had fled to Morocco for refuge. As a result of this persecution, the Jews of Morocco and the Moors planned to invade Spain with the assistance of Spanish Jews. In the meantime, the plot was uncovered and the Jews of Spain suffered for their intentions. Early in the 8th century, the Mohammedans from Morocco, united with the Black Jews, made what we call an amphibious landing at Gibraltar. This invasion was successful. Nahum Schlaus says that the first one to set foot on the soil of Spain was General Tarif, a Jew of the tribe of Simeon, after whom the island of Tarifa opposite Tangiers was named. However, the Rock of Gibraltar, previously known as the Pillars of Hercules, received its new name from the great Moorish conqueror Jebel at Tariq, which means the Mountain of Tariq. Here is a vivid account of the conquering Moors described by a writer who sympathized with Christian Spain. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces were black as pitch, their eyes shone like burning candles, their horses were swift as leopards, and the riders fiercer than a wolf in the sheepfold at night. The noble Goths were broken in an hour, quicker than tongue can tell. Oh, luckless Spain! These black Moors ruled over parts of Spain for more than 700 years. During this time, the Moors developed the greatest cultural civilization known anywhere in Europe. In the last half of the 11th century, there emerged a powerful dynasty of sultans from Senegal, West Africa, known as the Almoravides. They established their capital at Marrakesh, Morocco, and became masters of a new empire that included Senegal, Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and southern Spain. This empire was even larger than Western Europe. At this time, the first general of the Senegalese was Abu Bakr, who was supplanted by a stronger general, Yusuf ben Takfin. Yusuf's first aim was to construct an elegant capital with marvelous houses, a marble-floored palace, and beautiful flower beds. The city that he built, Marrakesh or Morocco City, became the name of this country. When Moorish power was declining in Spain, Yusuf crossed the Mediterranean into Spain in order to reinforce Moorish control. He brought 15,000 black troops with him and defeated Alfonso VI with his 70,000 Christians at the Battle of Zalaca. During the wars of the Almoravides, the greatest commander and hero of Spanish literature was slain. His name was Rodrigo Diez de Bivar, better known as El Cid. The Moors were known for more than just conquest. While the remaining part of Europe was in a state of ignorance, the Spanish people took advantage of the knowledge of the Black Moors. During the Moorish rule, many other capitals of Europe were mere hamlets, but Cordova, the capital of Spain, was a booming city. It is said that after dark one could walk many miles in Cordova and never pass through a street not lighted by public lights. When a person walked out after dark in London, he had to carry a candle or lantern with him to illuminate his path and had to wear high shoes to walk through the thick mud that often covered the roads. When many Europeans were garbed in skins and in coarse garments, the Moors were wearing silks, linens, and cotton cloth. They also washed in 900 bathhouses of Cordova. The palace of the Moorish Sultan or Caliph was far greater in beauty, comfort, and wealth than any of the castles of the medieval kings. The Moors used extremely highly polished marble in their construction. The sides of the walls were patiently carved, and the floors were made with various decorations called mosaics. It is said that the Moors were masters in mosaic work. The Arabs and Moor were known not only for their handicraft, but also for their science. Most of the knowledge of ancient Greece and the Near East was unknown in Europe during the medieval period. The Arabs had come into close relationship with Greek and Persian culture. The Arabs did not destroy this culture. Instead, they brought it to North Africa. There were many famous Moorish and Hebrew scholars in southern Spain. The Black Jews, like the Arabs and Moors, made a great contribution not only to Afro-Asian civilization, but also to the European. The Jews in the East knew Greek and Syriac. They helped translate the works of the Greek philosophers into Arabic. In turn, these works were studied by the Arab-speaking Jews of North Africa and Spain and translated into the Hebrew. The Black Jews of the Moorish Kingdom of Spain translated these works into the Latin language, and from Spain the sciences of the Greeks and Afro-Asian people were transmitted to Western Europe. Erudite Moorish men made spectacular contributions to philosophy, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and botany. The Muslim doctors were no sawbones, but masters of their science. They established academies and universities for the rich. Also, there were many free schools. There were excellent libraries. The scholarly Caliph of Cordova, in the 10th century, sent all over the world for books. The library of this caliph contained over 400,000 volumes. Moorish normal life was based on agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. The Moors brought into Spain rice, cotton, peaches, oranges, and lemons. Silk culture was introduced into Spain by the Moors. The Moors had fine pottery, glazed tiles, silks, velvet, brocades, jewels, and ornamental leather products. Moorish civilization had a gigantic effect on Portugal and Spain. This is the reason that these two countries were the first European powers to emerge after the Dark Ages. In the process of time, the Moors were driven southward. In the 11th century, El Cid conquered the great Moorish city of Valencia. Much later, in the 13th century, the King of Castile conquered Sevilla and Cordova. Afterward, the Moors were pushed into a small region called Granada. Outstanding Black Jews. Some of the outstanding black Jews of Portugal, Spain, and North Africa were the following. Hasidi Ibn Shaprat, who lived between 925 and 975. He began his career as a physician and continued his interest in the medical profession, especially in drugs. Eventually, he became physician to the Caliph. Later, he rendered official advice concerning diplomatic matters. He remained in the center of Hebrew scholars whom he supported. He entertained Moses ben Hanok, a representative of the Babylonian academies, who began the foundation of Talmudic learning in Spain. Sadia Gaon was born in 892 in the district of Fayum, Upper Egypt. He was learned in the Bible and the Talmud, in Arabic as in Hebrew literature, in Greek and Arab philosophy. He was one of the first Hebrew grammarians and philosophic commentators of the Bible. Sadia composed special works on many subjects such as philosophy, astronomy, geology, theology, mathematics, music, poetry, chronology, and philology. Isaac of Fez, Morocco, or Al-Fassi, so named because he came from the city of Fez, lived during the 11th century. Although the first important academy was founded by Moses ben Hanok in Cordova, the real foundation of Spanish Talmudic tradition was laid by Al-Fassi. The interest of Al-Fassi was in Talmudic law, especially such as were vital for the Hebrews of the dispersion. Samuel ibn Nagdella lived from 993 to 1056. He started out as a grocer. His acquisition of knowledge in the languages, mathematics, and philosophy was extraordinary. Because Samuel had a beautiful handwriting, he was appointed secretary of the Grand Vizier. In this position, he was able to put to good use his wisdom and knowledge. When the vizier died, Samuel succeeded him as advisor to the Moorish king of Granada. On several occasions, he was appointed as the head of the Moorish armies of Granada. Samuel ibn Nagdella was respected also in Jewish circles. The king of Granada elevated him to the position of Najid, that is, prince or leader of the Jews. Moses Maimonides was the outstanding black Jew during the Middle Ages. He is known as Rambam. Rabbanu Moshe ben Maimon. Moses was born in Cordova on March 30, 1135, the eve of the Passover. His father, Maimon, was an offspring of a great family of scholars and religious leaders. His family tree has been traced back to Rabbi Judah the Prince, the composer of the Mishma, to the royal house of David. While the Talmud and Rabbinics were the chief subjects of Maimonides, he dedicated time to the sciences that were taught and postulated by the ancient Greeks and medieval Arabs. He received his learning under Hebrew and Moorish teachers, and before long he was learned in the natural sciences, mathematics, medicine, metaphysics, philosophy, and logic. In the year 1145, when Moses was 10 years of age, Abdullah ibn Tumart, a religious fanatic, founded the dynasty of the Almohades. The Almohades, who proclaimed a religion of absolute monotheism, succeeded, after many battles, in expelling the Almoravides, Black Moors, from the highland of Morocco, and established their own rule over the Moorish Empire. The Almohades directed a reign of terror and persecution not only against Judaism and Christianity, but also against sectarianism in Islam. The Almohades displayed their intolerance for other religions. There were prohibitions against the existence of churches and synagogues. Jews and Christians were given the one alternative, Islam or death. Abdul-Mumin, who succeeded Abdullah ibn Tumart, permitted heretics to depart from his country. The Christian exiles found asylum in northern Spain. It was difficult for the Jews to find a place of security, and many of them died by the sword as martyrs for their religion. Some of the Jews converted to Islam as a disguise and remained loyal to their own faith, practicing Judaism in secret. About the middle of the 12th century, when Maimonides was 13 years of age, the Almohades crossed the Mediterranean Sea into Spain and established their power in Andalusia. In the late spring of that year, the Almohades invaded the city of Cordova and instituted a reign of terror and persecution. The magnificent synagogues were destroyed, the Talmudic schools at Seville and Lucena were closed, and non-believers in Islam, Jews and Christians, were given the alternatives of Islam, expulsion, or death. Because of all this turmoil and social unrest, the family of Moses Maimonides decided to depart from the inhospitable land and to sail across the Mediterranean to Morocco in northern Africa. They remained in the city of Fez for about 5 years, then traveled to Palestine. Because the environment was not conducive to learning, Moses moved to Egypt. Moses Maimonides continued his studies in medicine. His fame as a physician now spread throughout Egypt and beyond. It is said that Moses was offered a position as a physician to King Richard the Lionhearted, leader of the Third Crusade. When Moses was about 50 years of age, he was appointed by Alfadel, the vizier of Egypt, as his own medical advisor, and he was given a place among the royal physicians. Moses was also a great leader and judge of the Egyptian Jewish community. His son followed in his footsteps, religiously and secularly, receiving the leadership of the Jewish communities and as physician to the Sultan. Other outstanding black Jews of Spain were poets such as Solomon ibn Gabriel, Moses ibn Ezra, and Judah ha-Levi. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal. It was AD 1492, January 2nd, when the Moorish stronghold of Granada surrendered to the armies of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. For the first time since the year 711, all of Spain was in Christian hands. The decree to expel the Jews from Spain was signed on March 31st in one of the corridors of the Great Alhambra, the palace of the Moorish kings of Granada. The reason given for the expulsion of the Jews is that it was thought that they corrupted the Moranos, Jews converted to Christianity, by privately encouraging them in disloyalty to Christianity. The ultimatum given to the Jews expired August 1st, 1492, but the last group of Jews did not leave until August 2nd, 1492. That day was the 9th of Ab, the fast day, which is reminiscent of the destruction of the first and second temples. Professor Alan H. Godbey says that the reign of the last Jewish king of Ghana terminated in 1492. In order to satisfy Queen Isabella of Spain, King Manuel of Portugal promulgated a royal decree expelling the Jews and Moors from his country in 1496. The Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal were scattered throughout the Mediterranean coasts. It is estimated that over 100,000 Jews departed from Spain and Portugal during the persecutions and the expulsion. Some of these Jews went to northern Europe, Italy, and Turkey, but most of them went to Muslim countries of northern and western Africa. These black Jews would naturally go to African countries most of all, because of less persecution and they could disguise themselves easily among blacks. R. H. M. Elwes gives a graphic description of the Portuguese Jew, Baruch Spinoza. Middle-sized, good features, skin somewhat black curly hair, long eyebrows of the same color, so that one might know by his looks that he was a descendant from Portuguese Jews. When the Jews were expelled from Can't I fucking talk? When the Jews were expelled from Spain, about 100,000 entered Portugal. They were permitted to enter under the condition that they pay the poll tax, with the understanding that they would leave the country within 8 months. Also at this time, the king obligated himself to take the Jews wherever they desired at the termination of the 8 months. When the time expired, many Jews were stranded because the king did not provide enough ships in time. All the black Jews who were left behind were deprived of their freedom and sold into slavery. During the reign of King Joao II or John II, 700 black Hebrew children were ruthlessly taken away from their parents in Portugal and transported to the island of Sandome off the west coast of Africa. This island is located near Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Alan H. Godbey says that the Portuguese founded the island of Sandome in 1471. In the year 1484, King John II of Portugal, who reigned from 1481 to 1495, offered the Jews of his kingdom the choice of baptism or settling at Sandome. Multitudes of Jews were sent to this island during the reign of King John II. These Jews, Judeos as the Portuguese called them, are serious, reserved, and wealthy, holding most of the trade in their hands. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to establish themselves on the West African coast. They came first as merchants and secondly as conquerors and slavers. Later in this work, the black Jews in the Portuguese possessions in West Africa will be discussed in greater detail. Now, let us return to the Jews of North Africa. With the influx of tens of thousands of black Jews from Spain and Portugal seeking refuge in African ports, Morocco received a great share. But before this date, many Jewish tribes were entrenched in Fez, the Atlas, and the desert. In Morocco, there was a revival of Moorish and Jewish science in all areas. The Hebrew Academy in Fez competed with the one in Cairo in Algeria. There were many debates and lectures between the sages and scholars of these schools. Eldad the Danite, a Hebrew from the Jewish kingdom of Ghana, visited these schools in the 9th century. There was a celebrated Hebrew college at Sijil Massa, in the desert south of Fez. The school of Sijil Massa produced many illustrious scholars. There were grammarians, masters of Talmudic law, poets, and philologists. This period of Jewish scholarship came to an end when the fanatical Almohades, Unitarians, went on the warpath in 1145 and destroyed the city of Sijil Massa. This reign of terror was carried out against all non-Muslims. Concerning the destruction of Sijil Massa, Ibn Ezra writes, "I say, let there be mourning for the community of Sijil Massa, city of great scholars and sages. She sees her light covered with shadows, the pillars of the Talmuds were shattered. The temple of the law was destroyed, and the Mishnah was trodden underfoot." There are many Jewish tribes and settlements throughout Morocco and the Sahara Desert. The 8 Musa, or Beni Musa, sons of Moses, is one of the spectacular Jewish tribes. Leo Africanus, a Moorish converted Jew, states that the Jews of North Africa are of a hybrid quality. They have proselytized and intermarried among the Greeks, Vandals, Romans, Spaniards, and Portuguese. The Jews intermarried among the Greeks when the latter established their colony in Libya called Cyrenaica. Some intermarriages occurred between Jews, Romans, and Vandals when the latter two invaded North Africa, and before the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal there were some intermarriages. Considering all this intermingling, many Jews of North Africa still retain much of their colored features. According to Maurice Fishberg, who was quoted by Alan Godbey, he was unable to distinguish a Jew from a Mohammedan while passing along the streets of Algeria, Constantine, a city in North Africa, and Tunis. It is remarkable that among the non-Jewish natives there are seen many Jews of Negroid type. Fishberg visited Africa during the early part of the 20th century. There are black Jews living in the multitude of oases in the Sahara Desert. Nahum Schlaus, the white Jewish rabbi, visited these Jews of North Africa and the Sahara during the turn of the century. Schlaus obtained his information of these Jews from 3 sources. 1. From the historical records of the Arabs. 2. From the oral traditions of the inhabitants of the Sahara. 3. From archaeological evidence excavated from the ruins of old Jewish cities in the Sahara and Sudan, which date from the 13th century. About halfway down the eastern border of Algeria, there are large settlements of black Jews at a place called Wargla, says Schlaus. Jews were at Wargla as early as 620 AD, according to Godbey. Again, Godbey says, in the Wargla oasis of Algeria, 350 miles from the Mediterranean, is a colony of Jews as black as Negroes. In the Garian section of Libya, not too far from Wargla, there exists the troglodyte Jews. It is reported that the Jews fled to the strongholds of the Nefusa mountain range because of Roman and Arab persecution. Godbey quotes H.S. Cowper, who says that the Jews of the city of Tripoli assert that they migrated from Garian. These Jews constructed subterranean synagogues and underground houses. Schlaus visited the strongholds of these troglodyte Jews in the early part of this century. The Jews had built compartments 3 and 4 stories underground, containing a population of 30,000. Godbey says that Hessi Warteg visited their cities of Beni Abbas, Jebel Nafusa, Yahud Abbas, Tigrena, Jebel Ifrin. They had shops, stores, schools, and synagogues all underground. The achievements of these Jews prove what a persecuted society can do under adverse conditions. These Jews had a foundation to build on, unlike other persecuted people. They had their history, culture, laws, language, and skills. Between Wargla and Garian, there is a Jewish town called Tigrena. Here, the Jews have also constructed subterranean compartments. Nahum Schlauss says he was guided to an ancient synagogue which was located underground. At this time, he made an extensive observation of the village, which contains 20,000 underground courts and its 700 inhabitants. Also, he found there a young man teaching Hebrew. When Schlauss was in this city about 1 hour, the men had just returned from the market. Schlauss says they are all of a fine, dark type. The rabbi was descended from Jews who had immigrated from Morocco. The rabbi at this time informed Schlauss of the fact that there existed in the district many traces of deserted Jewish cities and cemeteries now abandoned. The Jews of this country have handed down the oral tradition that in ancient times they constituted the majority of the population, but that epidemics, wars, and frequent conversions to Islamism have reduced their number. On one occasion, Schlauss met a Jewish itinerant merchant of Nafusa who had just arrived from Fezzan. This Jew had traveled all routes of the Sahara. He assured Schlauss that other Jews existed at least in the East Sudan, Chad, Sudan, and Ethiopia. A black-skinned population which some call the Felici, and which are generally known among the Tuaregs as the Krit. They observe the Sabbath and are known to be of Jewish origin. Many of the tribes in the Sahara and in the Sudan are Muslims in religion, but are Hebrew in nationality. Nahum Schlauss says numbers of these Islamized Jews may be found everywhere. They are among the nomads of Algeria, the Smul, the Hanansha, the Traris, the Masmada, the Muarjarin, the Cables, the Tuat. You will find them among the Urishfana, the Gariani, the Brahmi in Tripoli. You will find them in southern Morocco among the powerful clans of the Dagatans, who control the routes to the Sudan and southward. They are non-Jewish by religion, but aware of their Hebrew origin. They are friendly to the Jewish merchants. Frequently, the Jew is the only communication between these tribes and the outside world. The Dagatan Jews are scattered in clans through many caravan route oases of the Sahara and the Sudan. Godby says the word Dagatan means traders. They are located near Timbuktu and hundreds of miles northward. They are also found east of Timbuktu and Gao. The two main factors that motivated the black Jews to penetrate into North Africa were commerce and persecution. Also, these two factors impelled them to migrate into Central Africa, which is known as the Sudan. The West African Jews during the slave trade. The black Jews who migrated to the Sudan from the north converged with the Jews migrating from the eastern Sudan to the countries of the Niger River. It is a known fact that the Jews and Judaism were in Africa 1500 years before Islam, and that everywhere the Arabs went, the Jews were there. The black Jews guided the Arabs and Moors into Spain and acted as interpreters. When the Muslims came into the Sahara, they found the black Jews stationed on all the trade routes, and I can positively say that where Mohammedanism is currently prevailing in the Sudan, Judaism once had been dominant. There is much proof, and still much more to be revealed by scholars, that there existed prior to the slave trade and subsequent to it many Jewish tribes, colonies, and kingdoms in West Africa. The Moorish writer Leo Africanus informs us of the past existence of a medieval Hebrew state called Kamnuria or Kanuria. Its two main cities were Kamnuri, obviously its capital, and Nagira, and this state was located north of the Senegal River. According to this Moorish Jew, the black African Hebrew state had vanished by this time. There are two reasons given for the ruin of this kingdom. 1. The intensive sandstorms of the Sahara Desert caused droughts and rendered the cities uninhabitable. 2. The migration of the Fulas or Fulbi towards the west. The Kanuri call the Fulas Falita. These Fulas transmigrated the entire Sudan from the Nile to Senegal. The Kanuri Jews are now located in the central Sudan along the trails hundreds of miles north, south, east, and west of Lake Chad, where they migrated from Senegal. It is the conclusion of some scholars that when the Jewish kingdom of Ghana fell, many of the Hebrew tribes established settlements among the African tribes throughout Central and Western Africa. Thus, the Moorish writer Al-Idrisi of Andalusia, Spain, wrote in the early part of the 12th century about the powerful Hebrew colony of Lamlam. Lamlam was situated about 200 miles west of Timbuktu. The Hebrew merchants were then monopolizing the trade that was concentrated at Timbuktu. Lamlam was entirely Jewish, and she fought wars to maintain her control of trade. Idrisi also said that there were only 2 towns south of the Kingdom of Ghana, and continues, according to what the people of this country report, the inhabitants are Jews. When they had reached the age of puberty, they were branded on the continents or at least the temple with fire, leaving identifying marks. All the dwellings in their countries were built on the bank of a river, which flowed into the Nile. Idrisi meant the Niger River. It was the belief of the time that the Niger formed an upper reach of the Nile. The black African Hebrews had settlements not only in the interior of Africa, but they also had communities on the west coast of Africa from Morocco to Angola. In the year 1856, Dr. J. L. Wilson wrote his History of Western Africa. He transmits to us the composite religious culture of some of the inhabitants of Senegambia, or Senegal, and Guinea. In Senegal, he said, there is a complete medley of paganism, Judaism, and Mohammedanism, and it is difficult to say which of the three occupies the most prominent place or exerts the greatest influence upon the character of the people. However, the sentiment of the inhabitants regarding this multi-religious mixture was that the combination of the three religions furthered the welfare of all. How do we rationalize and explain the medley of paganism, Judaism, and Mohammedanism near the ruins of the medieval Jewish kingdom of Kamnuria? It is obvious to researchers that after the breakup of the Hebrew kingdoms of Ghana, Kamnuria, and Lamlam, the black Jews migrated to remote regions of the interior and the coast. Then these Hebrews came under the pressure of Muslim propaganda and pagan influence, resulting in what is known as cultural diffusion. If you recall what Ch6 said, many Jews became Muslims but still retained their Jewish origin. Wilson also informs us that in northern Guinea, there is a conglomeration of Judaism and paganism combined, and in southern Guinea, there is a combination of Judaism, paganism, and some traces of Christianity. In northern Guinea, or Portuguese Guinea, Judaism is more highly practiced. Some of the outstanding rites are purifications, the observance of the new moons, a designated period of weeping for the dead, during which time they wear sackcloths and ashes. Bloody animal sacrifices, with the careful sprinkling of blood upon the doorposts and the altars, the division of the tribes into different families, frequently into 12 parts, the 12 tribes of Israel. Formal processions, circumcisions, and various other practices probably of Hebrew derivation. A few of these rituals, especially circumcision, might have derived from the Muslims, but we are forced to consider the entire congeries of the Hebrew cultural traits, which is indicative of the Hebrew religion. Wilson says, although the natives of Africa retain these outward rites and ceremonies with the utmost tenacity, they have little or no knowledge of their origin or the particular object which they are intended to commemorate. Many of them are performed to shield themselves from some threatened evil or to secure some coveted good, but in the great majority of the cases they are attended merely as a matter of habit, and the only reason assigned for observing them is that their ancestors did the same before them. It stands good reason that if their ancestors observed these Hebrew rites, they were surely Hebrews. It is written, "They have said, 'Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in their remembrance.'" Like the black Jews in America, some of the Jews of Guinea don't remember their original nationality. This deplorable ignorance is attributed to various causes. 1. The fall of the Hebrew kingdoms. 2. The lack of communication with Jewish educational centers. 3. Intense persecution and the deliberate blotting out of the mind of their true nationality. Thus, Nahum Ch6 said this about the Islamized Jews he met. In most cases, these Hebrews by race and Mussulman by faith seek to hide their origin, which has become a burden to them. In another example, the persecution of the black Jews in Portugal was so ruthless and frequent that Cecil Roth tells us the Jews did not divulge to their children the secret of their religion until they had attained the age of reason. The Hebrew religion is such that if you deny your religion, you will eventually deny your nationality. The sociologists and psychologists know, and history has proven that, if you deny your culture and nationality over a long period of time, you will totally forget it through a process of assimilation. The black Jews came to Africa not only by land, but also by sea. As you recall, in the year 1484, King John of Portugal deported great numbers of black Jews to the African island of San Thome. The island of San Thome near Nigeria and the Cameroon was discovered by the Portuguese in 1471, and it was established as a penal colony. To this island, Jews were sent who would not accept baptism. It is obvious that the Jews were deported to San Thome not only to mete out punishment to them, but King John's ulterior motive was to establish a commercial base with sophisticated black Jews in his growing empire in Africa. As time elapsed, the Black Jews in Portugal and the Black Jews in the Portuguese colonial possessions became known as Black Portuguese. They were called Black Portuguese because they were born in Portugal and they knew the history, culture, and language of Portugal. As it has been mentioned before, King John of Portugal furnished ships in order to deport the Jews to any country they desired. However, unscrupulous Portuguese captains exacted as much money as they could from the Jews and dumped their human cargo at various places along the West African coast. As a result, Alan Godbey writes that Winwood Reade met blacks in Guinea, West Africa, who called themselves Portuguese and claimed descent from Portugal. Reade wrote his book in 1864. In another case, Daniel P. Mannix writes that Captain Cutler, a slave trader from Boston, was barbarously murdered with 2 of his sailors by a community of Black Portuguese established near the mouth of the Sierra Leone River. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to trade on the West African coast and to establish colonies on a large scale. The Canary Islands were discovered by the Portuguese in 1341, ceded to Spain by Papal Bull in 1344. Senegal was discovered by the Portuguese in the 15th century, and the first settlements are believed to have been Black Portuguese. The Gambia River mouth was discovered by the Portuguese in the 15th century. Sierra Leone first visited by the Portuguese in 1462. Guinea discovered by Portuguese in 1446. The island of San Thome discovered by Portuguese in 1471. The new inhabitants were Black Jews deported here in 1484. Black Jews migrated to the Angola coast from San Thome between 1484 and 1499. The white Portuguese missionaries reached Angola by 1560, but white settlers did not establish a community until 1575. Let us return now to the Jews of San Thome Island. Scholars are uncertain concerning the exact number of Jews deported to this island. It is certain that the number lies in the thousands and perhaps the tens of thousands. Continuous research is needed in African Hebrew history, especially in the excavation of ruined Hebrew cities of Africa. When this gigantic work is completed, I believe the evidence will reveal information that will amaze humanity. It is my sincere belief that a greater number of Black Jews were deported to the western coast of Africa than is admitted by some writers. By the edict of King Manuel of Portugal in 1496, banishing the Jews from Portugal, all Jews were to be out of Portugal by October 1497. However, considering this matter, he decided to Christianize the Jews, fearing the loss of a valuable population. He wanted the continued use of their knowledge and services. He concluded that the only way the Jews could be tolerated in his country was to force them into the Christian faith. In March 1497, a command was proclaimed throughout Portugal for all Hebrew children between 4 and 14 years of age to be brought for baptism. All parents who did not bring their children voluntarily had their children taken away violently by the officials and forced into baptism. Cecil Roth writes, "Scenes of incredible horror were witnessed as they were torn away by the royal bailiffs. The latter did not obey their instructions too closely, frequently seizing young people of both sexes up to the age of 20. In many cases, parents smothered their offspring in their farewell embrace. In others, they threw them into wells in order to save them from the disgrace of apostasy, and then killed themselves. Sometimes, even old men were dragged to the churches and forcibly baptized by overzealous fanatics. Horrendous conditions like these, and much worse, compelled many Jews to escape secretly out of the country. These Black Jews went to Portuguese colonial possessions in Western Africa. Remember that the Portuguese colonies in Western Africa were Guinea, San Thome Island, Senegal, Angola, and a few islands near the African coast. During the persecutions in Portugal, thousands of Jews left the country. The Jews were leaving the country in such large numbers that in 1499 and 1531, the kings published a decree forbidding the new Christians, Black Jews, from leaving Portugal without special permits. At this time, many Jews became Christians out of fear. Many of them were known as secret Jews, practicing Judaism in secret under the guise of Christianity. Some writers call these Jews nominal Christians, Jews who are Christians in name only, but practice Judaism in secret. In spite of all the prejudices against the Black Jews of Portugal, they excelled in all the trades, skills, professions, and businesses. The wealth of the Jews was tremendous. Portugal is a small country about the size of the state of Florida. Nevertheless, in the year 1610, the Jews alone were worth 80 million ducats. The Jews dominated commerce and export trade, so naturally the Black Jew would engage in commerce and trade in many parts of Africa after they have fled from Portugal. The Black Jews of Angola. In the country called Gabon near the Congo, there were black Jews known as the Bavumbu. Some writers call them by various names, such as Mavambo, Mayamba, Mayumba, and Mavumbu. Abbe Proyart, a French writer, says that these Jews held the coast of Luango between the Congo River and the Rio Muni in Gabon. In 1776, their country began about 60 miles from the coast and extended north from the Congo about 200 miles. In appearance, these black Jews are hardly distinguishable from other Africans. It has been reported that these Jews practice some divination and magic like native Africans. However, they observe some Jewish ceremonies and live in separate communities, not considering themselves native Africans. The villages of these Jews are situated along the Luango coast for more than 100 miles, even south of the Congo River. Godby writes that when they are interrogated in regard to their origin, some of these Jews say they migrated from the south, probably Angola, some from the north, probably Nigeria, some from the other side of the mountains, perhaps Ethiopia. Like the Portuguese Jews, the Bavumbu Jews were very active in commerce. When David Livingstone was in Africa, he discovered a settlement of educated blacks about the year 1847. They were located inland about 200 miles from the Luanda coast and are known as the Jews of Angola. These black Jews were active in commerce, eager to learn, and possessed much knowledge of Portuguese history and law. In their commercial enterprises, these Jews penetrated inland hundreds of miles from the coast and were known also as clerks and writers. Livingstone considered these Jews to be deportees from Portugal. St. Paul de Luanda began, like Saint-Thome, as a penal colony for the punishment of criminals. In Portugal, many of these black Jews were considered criminals. Also, many of these black Jews of the land of Angola, it is said, came from Saint-Thome Island. All available evidence indicates that the Jews of the Angola coast were Portuguese Jewish outcasts. Many black Jews were established inland and along the coast of Angola, the Congo, and Gabon. Friedrich Ratzel writes that the tribes on the Luango coast and the Cabinda north of the Congo River were once Christianized. Ratzel observed a ceremony of baptism followed by circumcision. However, these tribes were Jewish in origin. The Christianity Ratzel saw among them was a disguise. The circumcision practiced among them is not of Jewish derivation. The Christians in Portugal did not practice circumcision. In fact, Cecil Roth wrote that circumcision among Jews in Portugal was practically an impossibility, for its discovery was equal to a death sentence. Godby wrote concerning the Mavumbu Jews on the Luango coast, "It seems that the Mavumbu may be the remnant of a much more numerous Judaism that was vigorously assailed by Portuguese missionaries." The Abbe Proyart records that nominal Christians, secret Jews, once numbered hundreds of thousands. Whenever the Jews were in Spain, Portugal, or their colonial possessions, they disguised themselves as Christian in outward form, but practiced Judaism in secret. Many of these new Christians knew Christian rites better than the old white Christians. In the year 1547, the Papal Office authorized the establishment of the system of the Inquisition in Portugal. The word Inquisition means inquiry or investigation. The Inquisition consisted of a tribunal of religious judges. Its purpose was to investigate and purge out heretical Christians, persons who questioned certain Christian principles. Although some white Portuguese Christians suffered at the hands of the Inquisition, this system was mainly directed at the new Christians, the secret black Jews. The Inquisitions were persistent, gruesome, and ruthless in the totality of their procedures. They interfered in the private affairs of individuals. They intimidated and coerced individuals to inform on their neighbors. They employed a wide variety of continuous, horrendous tortures, including public shows of burning human beings at the stake, and, in order to satisfy their desires for the punishment of heretics, they sought out not only the living, but also the dead. Garcia de Horta, a Jew of Portugal, was discovered to have been a secret Jew. His body was dug up out of his grave and burned by the Inquisition. In another case, a Jewish woman by the name of Elvira de Campo was indicted and tortured for 2 years in order to elicit a confession from her. The charges against her were not eating pork and putting on clean linen on Saturdays. According to this woman, these charges were not heretical practices. She wanted to be clean and pork made her sick. Whenever the Christian Jews could escape from Spain and Portugal beyond the reach of the Inquisition, they threw off the guise of Christianity and practiced Judaism openly as they did in Turkey. However, the unfortunate new Christians, nominal Christians, or secret Jews in Portuguese possessions in Western Africa, India, and elsewhere could not throw off the disguise of Christianity. The Inquisition even dispatched its inquisitorial agents to the Canary Islands, Madeira, Guinea, India, South America, San Thome, and Angola in order to search out secret Jews. From 1561 to 1623, about 3,800 individuals were tried. Many of them were Christian Jews of San Thome Island. They were charged with maintaining Jewish principles. Cecil Roth wrote that Christian Jews emigrated to the Portuguese colony of Angola in West Africa, where agents of the Inquisition were sent to hunt them out in 1626. Now, we can understand why writers like Friedrich Ratzel considered the tribes along the Loango and Cabinda coast Christians. These Jews had to maintain a Christian guise, and particularly so in the presence of white people. Any European could have been an agent of the Inquisition. It is certain that many black Jews of Portugal, San Thome, and Angola, who became victims of the Inquisition and Portuguese persecution, were sold in the slave trade. This Atlantic slave trade lasted more than 400 years, from 1444 to about 1880 in some parts of South America. Some scholars have located black Jews within the entire Niger River Bend. The countries in this territory that have contained black African Jews include the following: Upper Volta, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Dahomey, and Nigeria. Joseph Dupuy, concerning the Jews in 1824, says, "The lands occupied by these people cover a wide extent between Messina and Kaby. Messina is located in southern Mali, inside the Niger River Bend, and Kaby is found at the southern part of the Ivory Coast." The Jews among the Ashantis. Among the Ashantis of the Gold Coast, Ghana, are found Jews who observe many Hebrew customs. They don't fight on Saturday, but they rest. They celebrate the New Year of the Jews, which occurs in September or early October. They use the word Amen at the end of their hymn of thanksgiving. Like the Hebrews of old, they marry in their tribe only. They perform cross-cousin marriages. The Ashanti Jews also observe the laws of uncleanness after childbirth, purification ceremony of the 40th day, the menstrual seclusion law, and ceremonial ablutions. The Ashanti Jews have a breastplate like the high priest in ancient Israel, and it is divided into 12 parts representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Also, they have the misnefit, or headdress, with its gold disc in front, which in ancient Israel bore an inscription, "Holy unto the Lord." The Black Jews of Dahomey. Dr. J. Kreppel reported in 1926 that there existed a large Hebrew community of black Jews in the interior of Dahomey, West Africa. These Hebrews have their own central temple where they sacrifice animals. In their temple are found many laws engraved on tablets which are attached to the temple walls. They have a high priest with a large number of priestly families whose members walk from house to house rendering educational and religious instructions to each family of the community. Moreover, these Jews have their own Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, written on old parchment in Hebrew letters, but they have no other books. What little Judaism they possess was transmitted to them from their ancestors. Dr. Kreppel says that they observe the Sabbath and other Jewish customs despite the pressure from their pagan environment. Yoruba Jews of Nigeria. There are black Jews in southern Nigeria who are called the Imo Yokwame, or strange people, by the native Africans, but these black Jews call themselves by the Hebrew name B'nai Ephraim, or sons of Ephraim. These Jews claim that their ancestors immigrated from Morocco, a fact which Godby says is supported by their language, a mixture of Maghrebi Arabic and local Negro speech. Thus, Abu, father, has become Yaba. Mother, Hebrew M, is Ima. Nevertheless, most of their language is similar to the black Yorubas around them. The Yorubas have influenced these Jews to a great extent in their external social life. It is said that the crocodile is the sacred animal for all. The customary sacrifices of the Yorubas appear to be the same for the Jews. The assertion of these Yoruba Jews is that their ancestors were driven from locality to locality by Muslim persecution. They did not find rest even when they arrived at Timbuktu. Surely the prophecy has been fulfilled. "And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart and falling of eyes and sorrow of mind." These Yoruba Jews lived in the Ondo district when Godby wrote in 1930. This district is 900 miles southeast of Timbuktu. When Godby wrote, they numbered about 2,000 people in 20 small hamlets. Pertaining to their Hebrew political structure and culture, they have 7 hereditary heads of the community. Their leadership is that of a priesthood. They are known to have copies of portions of the Torah, Old Testament, preserved in a most holy place. However, their social life is not Torah-controlled like many of the Hebrew cultural traits among the Ashanti Jews. These black Jews observe certain Jewish customs, among which are the great holy days. In almost every way, these black Jews are like the Yorubas, and are hardly distinguishable from them except for some outstanding Hebrew observances. One of the most notable among these black Jews was a young man named Bata Kinde Amgoza, Ibn Lobagola, who was taken from Whydah Dahomey to Scotland. After he received 4 years of the white man's education, he returned to his home in Africa. Dr. Alan H. Godbey postulates the position that black Jews were on the West African coast from Senegal to Angola, and they, the Jews, were driven to this area from the Central Sudan by Muslim propagandism. Having a knowledge of the black Jews in the United States, Dr. Godbey arrived at this conclusion. These facts have peculiar significance when the presence of Judaism among American Negroes is to be considered. Hundreds of thousands of slaves were brought to America from this Western Africa during the days of traffic, beginning nearly 400 years ago. How much more of Judaism survived among the West African Negroes in that earlier time? As persecuted communities, they were rather more in danger than other Negroes of being raided by war parties and sold as slaves. It may be considered certain that many partially Judaized Negroes were among the slaves brought to America. How many of them might still hold some Jewish customs here is another question. Before Dr. Godbey published his book, The Lost Tribes, A Myth, Rabbi Matthew organized a Hebrew congregation in 1918 and proclaimed that the black people of the United States and the West Indies are the original black Hebrews. There were hundreds of thousands of black African Hebrews scattered throughout the United States, not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural communities of this nation. With the revelation of ample historical evidence, the authenticity of these black Hebrews can no longer be questioned. However, in regard to the purity of their Judaism among some of these Jews, that is another issue. Conclusion. According to biblical prophecy, the black Hebrews were supposed to have gone into slavery and captivity. Thus, we read of the prophet Jeremiah saying, "Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction, and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest, all her persecutors overtook her between the straits." Prophecy is similar to history in one respect, that is, it repeats itself. Duality in prophecy has been recognized by many scholars. As the historical evidences indicate, the black Hebrews were snatched from the west coast of Africa and sold into captivity. Jeremiah again says, "For lo, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel and Judah, saith the Lord, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bounds, and strangers shall no more make him serve. But they, the Hebrews, shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord, neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return, and shall be at rest and tranquil, and none shall make him afraid. For I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee. Though I make a full end of nations whither I have scattered thee, yet I will not make a full end of thee, but I will correct thee in measure, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished." The valley of dry bones spoken of by the prophet Ezekiel represents the nations that hold the black Hebrews under slavery and oppression, and the dry bones represent the black Hebrews. Ezekiel says, "So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived, and stood up upon their feet, an exceeding great army. Then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, Our bones are dried, and our hope is lost, we are cut off. Therefore prophesy, and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will open your graves, and cause you to come up out of your graves, and bring you into the land of Israel." The prophet Ezekiel calls the country wherein the black Hebrews are oppressed, graves. "And ye shall know that I am the Lord, when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up out of your graves. And I shall place my spirit in you, and ye shall live, And I shall place you in your own land, and then ye shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it, and performed it, saith the Lord. Epilogue. At the time that I am writing these pages, Reverend Ralph Abernathy is traveling around the country telling the American people, I am going to Washington to tell the pharaohs to let my people go. As it was with the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, so it is unlikely that the leaders in Washington will concede to the demands of the poor people's march. Considering all the rampant violence in the United States, there are many indications that the march on Washington will erupt into violence. The power struggle concedes nothing without a demand. When the government refuses to effect reforms and to implement justice, the people lose respect for the institutions of law and order. Law and order without justice are worthless in a democracy. When peaceful demonstrations do not soften the attitude of the government, militant and vigorous tactics must be employed by the militants in order to prevail upon the government. These tactics sometimes come close to anarchy. At this tense point, a mass movement can travel in one of two directions. If the government concedes to the demands of the people, all well and good, the mass movement falls apart because it has accomplished its objective. On the other hand, if the government refuses the demands of the mass movement, it generally suppresses the rebellion or civil disobedience. When the people continue to rebel and the government continues to suppress, this condition leads to fascism and a dictatorship. There follows mass murder, which is committed in the name of law and order. Dr. Martin Luther King expressed these thoughts before he was assassinated. If conditions do not change soon in this country, we will have a fascist police state in the 1970s. I don't think that America has the moral strength and will to resolve her racial problem and to avert a fascist takeover, but if rapid, collective, constructive action is taken immediately, we can save the American cities from disaster. If a police state is established in America, this will fulfill the prophecy of Daniel. And at that time shall Michael stand up. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Daniel 12:1. This has been From Babylon to Timbuktu, a history of the ancient black races, including the Black Hebrews, by Rudolph R Windsor. Narrated by Joseph Kent.